The story begins quite randomly. I got invited to go on an ayahuasca weekend retreat just a few days before it started. And this is due to the fact that a couple of people that had originally signed up for the trip had to drop out last minute. So when I got the invite from a friend, another friend of mine from out of town was sitting next to me and I asked him, "You want to do an ayahuasca retreat this weekend?" And he goes, "Whoa, yeah." And that was it. We asked if the shaman was known by someone in the group, and once that was confirmed, we were in. Now, typically people prepare for an ayahuasca retreat at least a week in advance, both physically and mentally. They spend their time resting, eating clean, meditating, and we found out we were going just a few days before the actual retreat. So we had to start preparing late. But to be honest, this wasn't a real concern for me. I looked up how important it was to actually follow the dieting guidelines before the weekend, and it turns out that a lot of that stuff has been debunked as irrelevant. In other words, your trip won't be affected by your diet. Now I'll admit, because I've had some very solid hallucinogenic experiences in the past, I was really nonchalant about the upcoming weekend. I've had at least a handful of trips with all the following. So DMT, for those of you that have never heard of it, is the most powerful hallucinogen in the world, the spirit molecule. I'm not going to get into the details of what it does here, but I definitely recommend reading up on it if you don't know what it is. I've smoked DMT 5 times in my life. Actually, no, it's more. I've smoked DMT 5 times in my life, and only one of those times have I managed to break through. So breaking through on DMT is tripping so hard that nothing you see is connected to reality. It's considered the holy grail of hallucinogenic experiences, and it's honestly easily the most mind-blowing experience of my life. When you smoke DMT, you are thrust into a totally different universe. It happens immediately, and it's very, very short-lived. It lasts a total about 10 to 15 minutes. Nothing you've ever done can really prepare you for it. From my own experience, as well as lots of other accounts I've read, it's just totally on its own category. So ayahuasca actually has DMT in it, which acts as its main active ingredient. It's a brew that can be made from different plants, and there are different recipes for it, but there are always 2 main ingredients it needs to have. It has to have a plant that has DMT in it, a plant that has monoamine oxidase inhibitors in it, also known as MAOIs. So MAOIs prevent your stomach from breaking down the DMT, allowing you to absorb it into your body. But since you're ingesting it in this way by drinking it, instead of smoking it like you would with pure DMT, the DMT goes into your body much more slowly and steadily, causing the effects to last longer while also lowering the intensity. It's basically a slowed down and stretched out version of smoking pure DMT. So like any good Boy Scout, I did plenty of research beforehand. Now anyone that has ever tripped before knows that one of the most important factors regarding the entire experience is the setting. This is mainly because you're going to be going through a pretty intense, surreal, unusual, weird, whatever, all these adjectives experience. So you want to be in an environment that is as comfortable as possible with people you also feel comfortable around. Hold on. Okay. You don't want to be considering social etiquette or other such nonsense during an intense hallucinogenic journey, and so you want everyone to be on the same page. Essentially, you want a safe place. Also, hallucinogenic drugs lend themselves to natural settings. So if you can, tripping in a natural setting is ideal. So our setting for the weekend was the following. A cabin-style house that was in the woods, by a lake, located in a town about an hour drive outside of Barcelona. It was honestly perfect. There were about 10 of us attending the retreat, including the shaman himself. And this group consisted of about half guys, half girls, all there in their 20s and 30s. And everyone there was at least a little bit of a hippie, except for me because I'm not really into the whole hippie thing, but everyone was a little bit into that stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to entertain hippie topics or discussions all day long. Meditation, come talk to me. Fasting, yo, pass the Kool-Aid. Superfoods, oh hell motherfucking yeah. But once the conversations start leading to spirits and energies and things like that, I just think it's all bullshit. How I interpret the world is based on scientific evidence, and that's it. So even though I understand full well that science doesn't explain everything, I think it's the best we've got. So that's kind of my mindset when we go into these things. So the reason I bring this up is because that distinction is actually really important and really relevant to how you're going to interpret the trip. An ayahuasca trip, according to the shamans that organize these things, is a calling of the spirits, with Mother Ayahuasca coming to talk to you and to help guide you through important life decisions. I interpret an ayahuasca trip as taking a powerful drug where one of the effects is heightened introspection, and so as a result of that, it helps guide you through important life decisions. Put another way, some people will go into this trip thinking spirits from another universe are going to come talk to me over the next few hours. If you believe that, you're probably going to be a bit nervous going in. My thoughts before an experience like this are like, I'm about to take a drug, things are going to get weird for a while for the next several hours inside of my head, but afterwards I'm going to be completely sober again and everything will be fine. So basically any seasoned drug taker will tell you, mindset is everything when you're going in. The night starts off with everyone sitting on mattresses and chairs around the living room in the house. The lights are dimmed, there's a fireplace with the fire burning, light music is playing, and the shaman is preparing everything on his table. The table is full of candles, liquids, potions, incense, and his iPhone playing the music from a portable speaker. It's supposed to be calming, but because we're just sitting there for hours waiting, the anticipation of taking the drug is actually making me more nervous than I'd typically be. So finally, he calls everyone's attention. He talks to us for about 10 minutes about what to expect. Nothing very substantial, to be honest. You're just gonna see some things, everything will be fine, enjoy yourself, be excited, stuff like that. He also says the trick is to just sit back and enjoy the experience. Don't fight it, or you're gonna have a bad trip. Now at the time, I didn't understand what he meant by this, but now that I've taken the drug, I do. So I'll explain this after I talk about the experience itself. So once the explanation is done, he announces the men shall drink first. And so all the guys get up and wait in line to take their drink. It takes about 10 minutes in between each person to have their drink because he spends so much time blessing and whispering and chanting to each drink before handing it off. So, like I said, I'm kind of rolling my eyes in my head during all of this. Not only that, I keep thinking that all this preparation is making everyone unnecessarily nervous because the anticipation keeps growing. And that's definitely what's happening to me. So anyway, when it's finally my turn, I drink what's about the size of a big shot glass of a thick purple liquid, and it's simply gross. It's absolutely disgusting, and it's actually really hard to keep down, and not everyone's able to. A few of the guys actually got up and had to vomit immediately after. So, after you take your drink, you go back to your bed and sit or lie down and just wait. And he had warned us that a few of the people in the room would get up to vomit maybe 20 minutes later or so after taking their drink. And sure enough, after a short while, a handful of the guys did get up and throw up. But I actually was able to maintain my drink down. I didn't need to get up and throw up. And periodic vomiting ended up becoming a recurring theme throughout the night. So, after an hour or so of waiting for something to happen, nothing did, except for feeling a bit nauseous. So I got up to take my second drink. And he told us that we can have one drink per hour, presumably so nobody drinks too much too quickly. It was actually a good idea. So after my second drink, I again managed to not throw up, a real accomplishment by the way, and after about half an hour I started feeling the same kind of onset I'm familiar with when I'm taking mushrooms, this kind of like nauseous feeling, a bit hot, a bit sweaty. So at this point, I'm kind of excited because I know something's gonna happen. And the shaman had warned us earlier that some people might trip after only one shot and some people might take many shots throughout the night and not trip at all. So needless to say, doing this whole retreat and not tripping at all would have been hugely disappointing. But because I felt this onset coming, I felt sure and excited that it was going to work. And remember, at this point I'd already been waiting anxiously for 2 hours for something to happen since I took my first shot. So, I got up to take my third shot. After I took my third shot, within 20 minutes I started what can only be described as tripping balls. This trip turned out to be one of the most intense experiences of my life. Let me explain the 3 most outstanding components of this trip, an ordeal that lasts about 4 to 5 hours. So the first part I'd like to discuss is the visuals. The visuals you see when your eyes are closed are, sorry to be cliche here, amazing. They're the most beautiful images that can possibly be seen because nothing in the real world can compare. It's the equivalent of being fully awake in a dream. The visuals are mesmerizing and you're in constant awe that you're seeing something so beautiful. They're the best visuals of any drug I've ever taken, except for pure DMT, but like I explained earlier, DMT is simply a more concentrated, pure version of the same drug. The actual images you're seeing are a steady stream of constantly changing patterns, kind of like a multi-dimensional kaleidoscope. The shamans refer to these images as sacred geometry. Now, I don't want to sound cliche here, but it's not something you can truly understand unless you've done it. That's just how it is. And the best thing to get an idea of what I'm describing is to simply go to Google, and look up ayahuasca visuals, and look up the images that people have made when trying to recreate what they've seen. Those illustrations give an idea of what the visuals are like. When your eyes are open, you still see these patterns in your eyesight, but you see reality as well. Or maybe I should call it reality. Am I right? It's a bit hard to describe how you can see both the visuals and reality at the same time, but you do. And the reality that you're seeing also looks otherworldly and warped as well, but you can still tell what everything is. In other words, if you need to get up to go use the bathroom or walk around, you can still do these things just fine. Well, I mean, not like fine, but I mean, you can get around and you can get them done without any help. Another thing to note about the visuals is that they're very sharp and very clear and very bright. It's like with really vibrant colors. It's not like some weird swirling mess. This is actually one of the reasons the visuals are so striking. You're seeing very specific shapes and patterns. Okay, so the second part I want to discuss is your mental state. Aside from the fact that you're seeing such incredible visuals, which will already have an impact on your mental state, your mind is also going to be racing. You were analyzing everything about your life nonstop. The introspection is extreme, and there's the added effect that you feel like you're a genius and that every insight you're having is brilliant. The exact phrase that kept popping in my head throughout the night was that I felt like Einstein times 100. Because you're going through something so intense, it makes sense that the thoughts you're having tend to drift towards important people in your life. And this is where the revelations tend to come into play. I spent most of my trip thinking about my family and closest friends, and it turns out that this is what happens to everyone during their ayahuasca trip, which I learned the next day when everyone was sharing their experiences. So earlier in the evening, before we drank the liquid, we were all handed some paper and pen so we could write down our thoughts or revelations during the trip. And we were also supposed to come into the trip with a question about our life that we wanted help resolving. I actually didn't have anything in particular I needed help resolving. My thoughts before the trip were something along the lines of, my life is awesome, I'm just here to enjoy the ride. I was certain I wasn't going to use that paper at all. Well, shockingly, for me at least, I had lots of revelations throughout my night and ended up using that pen and paper several times. These were the exact things I wrote down on my sheet of paper with an explanation next to each one. The first thing I wrote down was my ex-girlfriend's name. I'm not going to name her on here out of respect to her, but I ended up thinking about her a lot during the trip. I guess the combination of fear and awe and all these things makes you think about the people that you either are or were closest with in your life. And she was someone I was extremely close with at one point, so the trip made me realize that I just kind of wanted to be connected with her in some way again in my life. The second thing I realized was this, and this is exactly what I wrote down. I need to be in more regular communication with my entire family, including extended family and friends. During this trip, I thought a lot about all the kinds of people that have been a part of my life, even people I hadn't talked to in years. So this revelation is kind of something that we all know we should be doing in our life, but during the trip, it felt like it was something really, really, really important, and I needed to write it down to make sure I implemented it. And then the third thing that I wrote down was I want to tell mommy about this experience. This one's kind of interesting. Me and my mom, mommy in Spanish, are extremely close, but I've never, ever talked to her about any drugs I've ever done. She'd be shocked if she knew. As far as she knows, and as far as most people in my family know, I've never ever been near a drug. So this time I actually wanted to share this experience with her, since I do believe there's a lot more to drugs than drugs are bad and that's all there is to it. Like, I don't agree with that philosophy. And if I'm going to share a drug experience with her, this one makes the most sense to share. I'm on a spiritual retreat, we're drinking a natural tea and doing cleansing of the soul and blah, blah, blah. Way better than, hey mom, I was doing blow with these hookers at 4 a.m. So it became clear to me that sharing this experience with my mom could make us a bit closer, since I'd be sharing a side of myself I'd never shared before, or who knows how she might react, or what she might end up sharing with me. So even though I recognized this was a risky move, I decided I wanted to do it, so I wrote it down on the paper. And then the fourth thing I ended up writing down was, I want to share this experience with everyone I care about. And that's actually why I decided to write about this entire experience, and that's why I'm making this video right now. So, needless to say, I was actually shocked I had any revelations at all. And the irony wasn't lost on me that my revelations had turned out to be so meaningful to me, especially because I had come into the weekend as such a skeptic. I'll really never forget the level of awe and wonder I had once everything was finally winding down at the end of the night. and I was finally calming down and collecting my thoughts. And the third aspect I want to discuss with you is your physical state. And this part is kind of gross. The whole time you're tripping, you were somewhat nauseous, and sometimes even feeling a bit feverish, punctuated by occasionally having to go to either vomit or getting bouts of diarrhea. And not only that, in the living room, things start to get pretty weird. People around you in the room at any given moment will be laughing, crying, moaning, screaming, crying, or any other weird, bizarre behavior. But even though that sounds really creepy, to be honest, most of the time you don't realize it because you yourself are being really weird. And trust me, nobody is self-conscious at all during their trip, so it's really not a big deal. It's only occasionally that you sort of remember what's going on, so you open your eyes to take a look around at the room and notice that everyone is acting a bit weird. And then you quickly forget about it, since you're yourself going through your own insane, crazy journey trip, and you go back to being really weird yourself. Okay, so I'll give one example that illustrates this perfectly. At one point during the trip, I decided to go outside to look at the scenery. Remember that everything looks really cool in Ayahuasca, so you have a tendency to want to experience different kinds of settings during the trip and kind of look around. So I was pacing around the backyard, staring at everything, while my mind was racing with revelations, of course, when one of the other guys from the trip, I didn't realize was sitting on a chair nearby, said to me, "Hey man, do you mind pacing somewhere else? You're really distracting me." And it was at that moment that I realized that I've been laughing like a lunatic the entire time I've been pacing. And this has been going on for at least 15 minutes. So when he said that, in my head I was like,
"Fuck you. I'll laugh whenever the fuck I want."
But in person I was like, sorry, and walked to another area of the backyard of the house. So what was I laughing at? Well, I actually remember this moment well because his comment sort of stopped me during my stream of consciousness state that we're all sort of going through during this trip. And so I remember that moment clearly. During that segment of my trip, I kept thinking of all my closest friends and family, one by one, and kept realizing how each one of them is such a ridiculous person in their own way. So ridiculous and unique and absurd that they could all be the star cartoon character of their own television show. And I was thinking of them as cartoon caricatures, and I couldn't stop laughing. I kept thinking of how in my life I'm surrounded by such a varied cast of people. They're all so very different, but so very lovable and weird. And every person is weird if you stop and think about them individually. And they're all out there making moves, doing their thing. And this is the thought that I was obsessed with that just kept making me laugh. Okay. And I kept realizing that I had such a tremendous amount of love for each person in my life. So much that my heart might just burst out thinking about them. And I wanted each and every one of them to know it right then and there. I laughed so much that whole night that my head was hurting by the end. Every detail about life just struck me as so absurd. Another thought that was constantly funny to me was the juxtaposition of seeing images so amazing that you feel like you're witnessing the beginning of the universe, and then suddenly have to sprint to the bathroom due to explosive diarrhea. You go from mysteries of the mind to the bright lights of a bathroom after you take a nasty shit and look at the reflection in the mirror all fucked up, and you just think to yourself like, what are you doing with your life, man? Yes, I was even laughing when I was in the bathroom, which, by the way, not everyone gets laughter attacks on ayahuasca. I mean, I get them even when I'm sober, so that's probably just something specific to me. But if I had to describe the entire experience in one word, I would use the word overwhelming. Overwhelming physically, mentally, and emotionally. Every single second your brain is screaming some version of, oh my god. Every second. And this drug lasts several hours. So just let that sink in for a minute when you're trying to understand what this experience really is. It just goes on and on and on. And this could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how your trip is going. So while on one hand you're experiencing the most beautiful visuals of your life, and I mean that literally, nothing in a movie or reality or your imagination can compare, and your mind is making all kinds of amazing realizations and connections, there's another part of your brain that simply can't wait for this to end. And it's because it's an exhausting experience. And this is what the shaman means when he tells you to let it happen, to not fight it. If you spend your trip scared or desperate for it to end, you're gonna have an awful experience. And this is an experience you can't turn off no matter how much you might want to. Once you're in it, that's it. You're writing it until the end. And that's why you may as well embrace it and enjoy it. And that would be my one warning if you're considering doing this. You need to be mentally tough going in. As long as you can manage that though, this will be one of the most amazing experiences of your life. Once the drug started winding down, I felt enormous relief. And I decided, against my better judgment, that I really, really, really wanted to call my ex-girlfriend to tell her about my experience and my revelations. Obviously I understood this was a risky move, but I really, really, really just wanted to talk to her. I didn't care how risky it was or whatever, I just wanted to do it and that was it. And this also meant that I had to find my phone, which I'd put in the corner all night. And on a night like this, you don't want your phone anywhere near you. Your phone represents work and responsibility and news and emails and bullshit to check. I didn't want to think about anything connected to real life. In my current state of mind, it would just lead to too many thoughts. So I just got to my phone, I didn't read any of the notifications except for the few I couldn't help but see, and went straight to WhatsApp to call her. It was like 6 a.m. and I actually didn't expect that she would pick up, but she did. And she answered, obviously having been asleep, and I told her the whole story about everything that had happened and she just kind of listened patiently. And afterwards she was just like, Mikey, why do you do these things? Can you please come back to Barcelona? Can we talk here? And I was like, no, I can't because we're actually taking it again tomorrow. And she was like, oh my God, like after everything you told me, like, are you really gonna do this again? Like, can you please not do it? And I was like, no promises, gotta go. But even though I woke her up, and what I'm sure which was one of the strangest phone calls of her life, that phone call really, really meant a lot to me. Like after that night, like just talking to her, like really made me feel good. And yeah, obviously when we talked about that phone call a few days later, she told me, she was like, yeah, you sounded pretty weird. But either way, I was really happy I got to talk to her that night before going to sleep. And that night, I slept like a baby, a drug baby. Okay, so the next morning, everyone was excited to share their experiences, and there was a full range. Some people had a trip that was similar to mine, you know, visuals were incredible and so many important life decisions and revelations. And then some people got light visuals but were more or less themselves in their own head. And then some people barely felt anything. And not only was I surprised by how different everyone's trip had been in terms of intensity, I was also surprised that it seemed almost unrelated to how many shots of ayahuasca that they'd had. This doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what happened. Some people tripped hard with just 2 shots, according to them, of course. And one guy in our group took 5 shots total, and he told us that he spent the night mostly sober. And I really don't know what to make of this. But either way, we all signed up for 2 nights of this, so everyone had to start preparing mentally for going through the whole experience all over again. So because I was so pleased with my revelations from the night before, and because my experience had been so intense and really so perfect in a lot of ways, I decided to sit the second night out. Mentally, I just didn't want to go through another night like that again. And not to mention the thought of drinking more of that liquid, like really grossed me out. Your body definitely develops some kind of natural aversion to it. But as the day progressed and I started feeling better and everyone was talking so excitedly about their experiences, by the time the night came, I decided I would go again, but light. This time I would only do 2 shots. What ended up happening though, was that this time after I took my first shot, I started tripping after 20 minutes. No easing into the trip for me. It wasn't slow or casual like the first time, it was just right into it. But this time, however, my tripping was much lighter. I got the visuals, but to a lesser degree, and in my head I was more or less myself, not Einstein times 100. And the experience I had this night, the second night, was actually the experience I was expecting to go into before I started the weekend. A chill and reflective evening with a really cool screensaver playing for my head while I closed my eyes. This time the trip lasted 2 to 3 hours, and I never opted for another shot of ayahuasca. What I was experiencing was pleasant, and I didn't want to go into overdrive like the night before. One interesting thing that happened though, was that I became sober while everyone else was still tripping, and some of them were tripping hard. I was suddenly struck at just how weird the scene is. Most of the time, everything and everyone is fairly quiet, but from time to time someone starts panting or moaning or laughing or crying or something, and you do feel a bit like you're in an insane asylum. Not only that, our shaman would periodically get up to hum or sing or play the harmonica or play the drums. And of course, the whole thing was striking me as hilariously absurd. I mean, imagine a room that looks like a bunch of people that are ill and moaning in pain and trying to sleep, and then in the middle of the night, there's an old man singing and playing musical instruments and a really, really loud giant drum right in the middle. Needless to say, I was cracking up to myself as best I could, and continuing the theme of the weekend with my laughter attacks. And of course, the mini bursts of laughter fit in perfectly with the general weirdness of the room. Another interesting thing to note, now that the drug had worn off and I was tired and wanting to sleep, I couldn't help but think to myself, oh my god, why won't this idiot stop making all this noise and go the hell away? 2 hours earlier, I'd found his music beautiful and mesmerizing, but now sober, I just found it annoying. And it always amazes me that no matter how amazing and life-changing of an experience you might have, you still go back to being yourself almost immediately. Like, I just spent the previous 2 to 3 hours seeing images so beautiful that I felt like I was looking at the essence of existence. But now sober again, all I could do was be annoyed that the shaman wasn't letting me sleep. And I found this to be true of all intense drug experiences and realizations, no matter what you may learn and how existential you may get. You always go back to being yourself, to being concerned with small, stupid things. Small compared to the universe, of course. And I suppose it's just human nature. In other words, this experience isn't going to suddenly make you enlightened or above silly, earthly problems, but maybe it will just a tiny bit. And if that's true, that we're just a little bit more enlightened after experiencing something like this, I would consider that a very, very compelling reason to do ayahuasca. The next morning, everyone was once again eager to share their experiences, and once again there was a mix in terms of intensity of people's trips. Luckily though, everyone in the group had gotten at least one strong trip out of both nights, and amazingly, every single person that went on the weekend retreat was extremely satisfied with the entire experience. There was not a single person in the whole trip that had a bad trip either of the nights. So about 1 week after the experience is when I finally sat down to write about the whole thing. And there's one particular point I'd like to emphasize. As of writing this 1 week later, it already feels like a distant dream. One thing that's always true about these intense drug experiences, at least for me, is the fact that once you enter your regular routine life, your life-changing drug experience is already buried in the back of your mind and becomes like any other memory, something you only think about from time to time when you're reminded of it. Of course, a counterpoint to that is the first time I tripped on any drug ever, and it was mushrooms if you're curious, that experience did change my outlook on the nature of reality and life in general quite a bit. So perhaps hallucinogenic experiences simply don't have as much of an impact on me as it used to. Another part of it is the experience is so surreal that it doesn't feel real. And after a while, all you really remember is how it made you feel. When you retell this story, you find yourself repeating yourself, more out of habit than actually re-experiencing what it was truly like, probably because it's so different from anything else that you can't even really relate to the memory. I'd also like to mention this point is particularly important. I did implement the things I wrote down. I called my ex-girlfriend and we reconnected. I won't get into the details about it, but I'm super happy that I did. I reached out to a bunch of people that I was close to in the past but I hadn't talked to in years, and I'm still actively reaching out to others. I called my mom to tell her about the experience, and she was surprisingly unfazed and quite interested in the story, which I think is a good outcome. And I sat down to write about this experience, which of course became a much bigger task than I initially realized. And all these things I would consider positive changes and significant changes in my life. And in that respect, I must admit that I'm super impressed with ayahuasca in general, and I would also consider the trip one of the most important drug experiences in my life. And the final aspect of the experience that I'd like to talk about is how important it is to be reminded of the mystery of existence. We already know that the universe is big and mysterious, but taking a drug like ayahuasca really throws this fact to the front and center of your mind, and it's important to truly realize this every now and then. This drug gives you a really big kick in the head. It's like, hey, life is incredibly beautiful and mysterious, and take some time to appreciate that. Maybe this is why these types of drugs have such a profound impact on things like depression and anxiety. Because once you're truly made aware of how amazing existence really is, your personal problems just seem that much smaller. The other major realization you come to is to simply be more connected with others. Everyone's realization simply boiled down to essentially that. So yes, I 100% recommend doing an ayahuasca retreat if you've been considering it, and even if you haven't. The risk of a bad trip is minimal if you go in with the right mindset, and ultimately, what's the point of life if not to experience the most that you can? All right.